It's January 4th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with a deadly bombing over in Iran. Over 100 people have been killed by two bomb blasts at a remembrance ceremony for Iran's assassinated commander Qasem Soleimani. While no one immediately claimed responsibility, Iranian officials vowed revenge for what they call a terrorist attack. U.S. Federal Reserve officials are eyeing rate cuts in the new year, pointing out its policy rate is at or nearing its peak for the current tightening cycle, but they still remain cautious over when exactly such rate cuts will come. Police sought an arrest warrant overnight for the suspect in the stabbing of Lee Jae-myung, South Korea's main opposition Democratic Party leader. Lee has been transferred to a general ward for recovery from an intensive care unit. Tensions are flaring in the Middle East. Two bombs exploded and killed over 100 people near the grave of a slain Iranian commander on Wednesday. Iranian officials vowed to punish those responsible. Lee Seung-jae starts off.
More than 100 people were killed and at least 188 others injured after a series of blasts near the burial site of slain military commander Qasem Soleimani in the Iranian city of Kerman on Wednesday. Iran state media says at least one of the explosions was caused by a bomb placed in a suitcase inside a car and appeared to have been detonated remotely. The second blast occurred some 20 minutes later when rescuers arrived following the first explosion. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack, but the twin blasts came on the 4th anniversary of Soleimani's death in a U.S. airstrike, threatening to increase tensions in the Middle East even more. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, said the evil and criminal enemies of Iran had murdered a large number of people in Kerman, adding that the attack will be met with a harsh response. The Ayatollah added that the attacks came as heartless criminals tried to prevent people from visiting the grave of Soleimani. The deadly blasts come amid rising tensions in the Middle East after a drone attack in Beirut, which killed Hamas's second-in-command. With Iran-backed Hezbollah saying Israel are responsible for the drone attack earlier this week, the militant group's leader Hassan Nasrallah said the deaths of senior Hamas leaders would not go unpunished and warned Israel any war in Lebanon would come at a very high cost. Nasrallah, however, stopped short of declaring war against Israel. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
U.S. Federal Reserve officials are eyeing rate cuts in the new year. According to the December FOMC meeting minutes, they expect 3 rate cuts and are now focusing on timing. Lee Kyung-eun has the details.
U.S. Federal Reserve officials agreed that interest rate cuts are likely in 2024, but exactly when remains uncertain. That's according to minutes from the Federal Open Market Committee December 12 to 30 meeting released on Wednesday. At that meeting, the benchmark rate was kept steady for the third time to maintain a 5.25% to 5.5% range. The decision was also seen as a clearer signal yet of an end to its aggressive rate hike campaign is over. This came as the FOMC, responsible for setting rates, said its policy had likely reached or was close to its peak for the current tightening cycle. During the 2-day session, participants also acknowledged the progress made in the battle to bring down inflation. In fact, consumer prices in the U.S. slowed to a 5-month low in November, with the Consumer Price Index, a key gauge of inflation, rising 3.1% on year. The CPI has been slowing after it hit 9.1% in June 2022. 3 rate cuts are expected, each by a 0.25 percentage point by the end of 2024. However, the minutes noted high uncertainty regarding the timing, saying the actual policy path will depend on how the economy evolves. That could mean they're keeping options open, with further monetary tightening potentially on the table as a response to changing economic conditions. December's FOMC minutes also echoed the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell's remarks after the meeting. Powell changed the tune on the central bank's monetary policy, saying the end of the tightening campaign is in sight. However, he still took a cautionary stance on cutting rates, saying the 2% inflation target is yet to be achieved.
While we believe that our policy rate is likely at or near its peak for this tightening cycle, The economy has surprised forecasters in many ways since the pandemic. Ongoing progress toward our 2% inflation objective is not assured.
Following the reaffirmation of the Federal Reserve stance in recent minutes, U.S. 10-year Treasury yields experienced a decline. It extended losses for a fourth day, topping the 4% mark on Wednesday, indicating growing concerns from investors about the Federal Reserve keeping a hawkish monetary policy for the time being. 이경은, Arirang News.
The police late last night filed for an arrest warrant to formally arrest the suspect in the stabbing of the main opposition Democratic Party leader Lee Jae-myung. Lee is now recovering in a general ward. Shin Se-byuk with the latest.
The police issued an arrest warrant late on Wednesday night for the suspect involved in the stabbing assault on Lee Jae-myung, the opposition Democratic Party leader. The 67-year-old suspect, surnamed Kim, is charged with attempted murder. On the same day, a search warrant was issued for the attacker's residence and his real estate agency office in Asan, Chungcheongnam-do province. The DP chairman was stabbed in the neck early on Tuesday during a visit to Busan and underwent a 2-hour jugular vein reconstruction surgery in the evening. After spending around a day in intensive care, Lee was transferred to a general ward at Seoul National University Hospital for recovery on Wednesday afternoon. On Wednesday, the Democratic Party convened an emergency assembly to discuss the party's future operations. After the meeting, they announced plans to establish a specialized response unit focusing on the recent assault on their party leader. This team will closely monitor the progress of the investigation, address the circulation of false information to tackle any secondary victimization, and develop strategies for future safety measures. The DP leadership, during a separate meeting earlier on Wednesday, called the assault, quote, a blatant challenge to democracy.
What happened yesterday was completely out of place in a democratic society. This act of terror on Lee represents a blatant challenge and a direct threat to democracy. We call on the authorities to conduct a swift and comprehensive investigation.
As for the investigation into the stabbing incident, prosecutors have set up a team to look into the attack. The National Police Agency has also formed a 69-member special investigation team to conduct a thorough and swift inquiry. Separately, the police have also formed a dedicated protection team for key political figures, including party leaders, following the recent assault on Lee. This is a departure from the usual protocol where personal security teams are typically deployed for such individuals only during the official campaign period, starting 14 days before an election. This year's general elections begin their campaign period on March 28th. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
And President Yoon labeled the shocking attack on the opposition leader an act of terrorism against liberal democracy as he hosted a New Year's gathering for key state officials on Wednesday. He also vowed to do more in 2024 to improve the living of the people. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
President Yoon at a New Year's gathering with key state officials on Wednesday expressed the will to work harder towards improving people's livelihoods. The attack on Lee Jae-myung was also addressed. President Yoon acknowledged the main opposition party leader's absence due to being hospitalized and labeled the attack a form of terrorism.
테러라고 하는 것은 그 어떤 것이든 간에 피해자에 대한 가해 행위, 범죄 행위를 넘어서서 인간의 자유를 억압하고 자유 사회를 지향하는 우리 모두의 적이라고 할 수 있습니다. 자유민주주의의 적입니다.
Other leaders of the nation's constitutional institutions also addressed the seriousness of the incident and encouraged those in attendance to work towards improvement.
All members of the judiciary branch commit to never tolerating violence in any case and to making the utmost efforts to ensure that trials are conducted solely according to law and principles.
We hope that the government and the National Assembly can unite people to overcome this crisis and that this year will be one of bold change, thereby creating new hope.
Addressing the 200 in attendance, President Yoon said all efforts will be toward improving people's livelihood and call for close cooperation across all sectors. 3 ordinary citizens who showed extraordinary courage and warmth in 2023 received praise. This includes a nurse who was off duty when she saved an unconscious person at a department store, and a high school student who invented a tool to check whether a car crash was due to unintended sudden acceleration.
우리가 이런 시민을 격려하고 또 이런 분들의 정신을 널리 국민들이 공감할 수 있도록 하는 것이 우리 민생과 또 국민이 행복한 사회를 만드는데 정말 의미가 있는 거라고 생각합니다.
In the meantime, President Yoon Suk-yeol also gave appointment letters to the new ministers who took office following the recent cabinet reshuffle. This includes the new Deputy Prime Minister of Finance, Choi Sang-mok, and Minister of Patriots and Veterans Affairs, Kang Jung-hae. 김도현, Arirang News.
With the number of unmarried and elderly people living alone continuing to increase in South Korea, over 4 out of 10 households are now single-person households. According to data from the Ministry of Interior and Safety on Thursday, the total number of households registered as single-person households as of December 2023 stood at over 9.9 million. That's up more than 211,000 from a year earlier. And with the total number of households registered last year standing at over 23.9 million, the proportion of single-person households stood at 42%. And that figure is much higher than the 34% estimate given by Statistics Korea. Price pressure here in South Korea is expected to moderate in the new year, according to the chief of the Bank of Korea back in December. Then what about the country's major economic driver, exports? Will that sector grow big enough to feed the country's economy? Let's turn to Professor Oh Jun-suk this morning. Welcome and Happy New Year.
Good morning. Happy New Year.
Professor, the idea that inflation growth will slow and interest rates will fall in the new year appears to be a widely supported one among many analysts. Are you also on the same page?
I'm on a different page of the economy. POK forecast 2024, not that bright. It's just a dimmer. Talking about inflation first, it'll be very hard to reach targeted inflation 2%, though the pressure is dissipated. The POK, jacked up its inflation forecast for 2024 to 2.6% from its earlier estimate of 2.4%. It is uncertain that inflation will be approaching its target level given uncertainties over a rise in public sector fees and other costs. Now, what's going on interest rate? It kept its base rate unchanged at 3.5% for the 7th successive time. I suppose BOK will maintain its current monetary tightening stance regardless of the U.S. Fed pivoting toward a lower interest rate within ranges, might be just 1% point ranges. It might seem awkward, but for your health, when you go up, you better take the stairs step by step. But when you go down, take an elevator for keeping your knee joint sound and safe. This is a common saying about interest rate in the market. When it changes into down, it will gain speed. Then what is the right time to take an elevator going down? BOK said it will analyze the pace of the slowdown in inflation, economic downside risk, household debt trend, and moves in other major economies. In addition, finance minister said that the Korean government will closely monitor finance and foreign exchange markets and implement measures in light of the Fed rate decision. POK dropped growth rate forecast in 2024 to 2.1%. It said it is not yet, and we have miles to go before taking an elevator going down. Protraction of restrictive steps in major economies and weaker than expected recovery in China and recovery in private spending could pose downside risk for Korean economy for times.
That's a fun analysis too, really easy to understand. Professor Oh, there are still lots of uncertainties lingering, but what we do know for sure is that the U.S. Fed will begin to cut rates this year. You mentioned this briefly, but will such a decision have a noticeable impact on the Bank of Korea's rate calls? What do you think?
Yes, you got the point. According to a recent report by Bank of America, expect GDP growth over 1.2% in 2024, 0.6 percentage point above its prior forecast. Unemployment rate over 4.2%, down from 4.4%, and inflation of 2.2%, down from 2.4%. GDP above than the expectation, and unemployment and inflation lower than the forecast. I could draw a more optimistic picture of the U.S. economy based upon the better than expected performances. The fact is that the GDP growth and employment have held relatively steady in major economies facing extreme inflationary pressures. What is more encouraging is the volatility of a global supply chain is to diminish. As cutting rates in the first half of 2024 will help the Fed preserving and then try to pumping the expansion. It might be expected around the middle first half in 2024. I might say around March, it begins to cut down rates. After that, the Fed will likely keep interest rate at their current level, even though inflation is largely under control. Then, as the right timing, it might be the summertime to pump up the consumption. They are likely to cut down 2 or 3 times consecutively. As consequence, mortgage rate will also declining, pumping up consumption as the year goes on. Looking into the late of 2024, overall growth will return to a more stable pre-pandemic rate. Inflation will hover around the 2% point, and the Fed rate will be lowered to just below 3%. This will contrast quite sharply with recessionary or near recessionary condition that is in Europe and in China.
Right, and I cannot stress enough how South Korea's economy is heavily dependent on exports. Now, on top of strong exports, domestic spending is also another core factor that drives the country's economy, right? Hopes are high that price pressure will be alleviated this year, but what about domestic consumption? The central bank has voiced concerns over weak momentum in domestic spending, though.
Yeah, that's the problem. Yes, I agree. 2024 forecast Korea could undergo a modest recovery. In more detail, Korean economy is expected to be on track for a recovery in 2024 due to rising export, but sluggish growth looms large as higher for a longer interest rate and sticky inflation. It might be hampering global growth and domestic demand. Korea has faced multiple economic challenges caused by aggressive monetary tightening by major economies to curb inflation and geopolitical risks stemming from the Middle East and the Russian-Ukraine war. Those risk factors still remain in the market, but the economy has shown a sign of improvement in recent months, supported mainly by a turnaround semiconductor industry. Outside the demand will be relatively bearable, but the problem is inside the demand. On the domestic demand point, as you mentioned, is a problem child now. Private consumption and equipment investment remains subdued, and then it might be expected inflation trend changes into a declining trajectory as time goes. Now is the problem that the pace of employment expansion is losing momentum, notably service sector or the sole proprietor small shop. Promoting inbound foreign direct investment might be the major solution to getting out of this kind of demand slump. It is, however, true international investors see the same page of the global economy. As a global trade market is not recovered yet, surrounded by prolonged uncertainties, shrinking trade structure still goes on in 2024. I mean that the declining export will be slowed but not recovered completely. Considering both domestic and external economic conditions, Korean economy is projected to see a gradual deceleration in the domestic demand.
All right, Professor Oh, thanks so much for the comprehensive analysis. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Last year, there was an unprecedented number of people being forcibly displaced, driven by the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, regional conflicts, and natural disasters. But there are many people around the world working to make things better. Our Song Yoo-jin has this report.
A very challenging year. That's how Chun Hae-kyung, the representative of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees Korea, describes the year 2023. Last year, the world saw a record number of more than 114 million people displaced, including refugees and asylum seekers.
We have seen the situation in Ukraine continue to evolve. We have seen Sudan evolving a situation there, Gaza, as we still see on the news, and then also like earthquakes.
As the first Korean national to lead the UNHCR's Korean office, Ms. Chun brings over 2 decades of experience in refugee and humanitarian work. Her journey began with listening to stories about the Korean War growing up.
Our parents' generation worked so hard to build the country, right? So, and I grew up outside Korea when I was a child, so I was also very much interested in minority issues, right? So I did study refugee migration issues, and I think naturally I ended up in the UNHCR.
Looking ahead, she hopes things will get better in the new year.
Hopefully, politics and humanitarian assistance can be divided so that we could work in the areas where people need our assistance.
And she sees a significant role for South Korea in addressing these challenges.
It has substantially increased its ODA share, and there has been very positive pledges to UNHCR, but also to other agencies, right, and organizations. And also we see that with the Republic of Korea joining the UN Security Council 24 and 25.
Beyond governmental efforts, last December, 8 religious groups in Korea submitted the first ever joint pledge of its kind to the UNHCR's Global Refugee Forum. From this year, Ms. Chun will take up a new role as the director of the UNHCR Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific. Describing her term in Korea as rewarding, she recalls working on the country's lack of universal birth registration.
If you're a foreign parents born baby here, you know, like you don't, the Korean government doesn't register you, right? So there have been a lot of work in the past years, and you know, related legislation has been under discussion now. So the reason why I started joining the UN, and 20-something years later, I come back to Korea and I am working on the same issues, right?
Senses the gravity of the greater responsibility, Ms. Chun says she is ready.
I think in the region we have many states with different interests, but when it comes to refugees, as it was shown at the Global Refugee Forum, hopefully we can come together and I can be a constructive bridge to do that.
송유진, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Kim Seong, and now we turn over to stories from around the world. Russia and Ukraine announced on Wednesday that they have exchanged almost 500 prisoners of war. It is the first prisoner swap in nearly 5 months and the largest documented swap of soldiers so far in the conflict. Ukraine said 230 prisoners of war, including 6 civilians, returned home from Russian captivity, while Russia saw the release of 248 military personnel by Ukraine. The United Arab Emirates was involved in the exchange and said its strong friendly relations with both Moscow and Kyiv allowed it to mediate the complex POW swap negotiation. Ukraine's military intelligence agency also praised the UAE's efforts. Kyiv and Moscow have exchanged prisoners on a number of instances since the war began in February 2022. Now moving over to Mexico, where 31 kidnapped migrants have been rescued by Mexican state authorities. Mexico's Interior Minister confirmed on Wednesday their safe rescue. In the state of Tamaulipas, near the U.S. border on Saturday, unknown gunmen kidnapped 31 migrants who were on a bus heading from Monterrey to the border town of Matamoros. The migrants, mostly from Latin American countries such as Venezuela and Ecuador, were then forced off the bus into 5 vans. Tamaulipas Governor Americo Villarreal Anaya stated that the National Guard and the armed forces brought the kidnapped migrants to safety. A record number of migrants traveled from Central America and Mexico, attempting to reach the United States in 2023. Human rights groups have been warning of an escalating kidnapping crisis in Mexico's Tamaulipas border region. Chinese carmaker BYD overtook Tesla as the world's top-selling electric car maker in the final quarter of 2023. BYD, which stands for Build Your Dreams, outsold Tesla in battery-only full electric cars for the first time in fourth quarter last year, selling 526,000 to 484,000 units. Sales of BYD EVs benefited from having a lower price point than Tesla. Warren Buffett-backed BYD said that it produced 3.02 million new energy vehicles, or NEVs, in 2023, of which 1.6 million are battery-only electric vehicles. This puts BYD only slightly behind Tesla's 1.84 million fully electric cars produced in the same period. Lastly, the Rolex Sydney-Hobart yacht race came to a close on Wednesday as the last boat crossed the finish line carrying a cat named Ollie. Ollie and his owner Bob Williams' boat, named the Sylph 6, was the oldest boat in the race and received a warm welcome and cheers as it came into the Constitution dock with Ollie up on the deck to greet his fans. The Sylph 6 left Sydney for Hobart on December 26th with a crew of 4, including Ollie the cat. Before that, Ollie and Williams had sailed around the country for the past 5 years, even across the Tasman Sea to New Zealand. Williams described Ollie as my friend and mate.
Good morning. Yesterday's wintry precipitation brought colder air to the country. We're waking up to a colder morning than yesterday in most places at about -3 degrees in Seoul, but highs will rise fast, going up higher than Wednesday. Starting off the day with decent air quality but stagnant airflow will push ultrafine dust levels up in most parts of the country again. Sunny skies to start off the day with some fog. Then upper parts of the country will see more clouds covering by lunchtime, while the rest of the country will have sunny skies all day today. Now it looks like we're going to have a warmer than average temperatures through Friday. Then this weekend is looking freezing cold for any outdoor plans. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Friday's edition at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.